Pack your things and get out, now. My daughter Jessica stood in the doorway of my living room, her voice sharp enough to cut through the howling wind rattling the windows outside. Rain hammered against the house I'd spent 38 years teaching students to appreciate: architecture, history, the bones of buildings that tell human stories. Behind Jessica, Kyle smirked, arms crossed like he'd already claimed ownership of every corner. I stayed perfectly still, because what they didn't know was that my neighbor Patricia had been watching through her kitchen window, and she was already on the phone with police. You're probably wondering how a 70-year-old retired history professor ended up being ordered out of her own home by her own daughter during the worst storm of the season, and why I'm standing here completely calm while my child threatens to throw me into the street. Let me take you back 2 weeks. Because what Jessica forgot is that I didn't just teach history. I learned how to document evidence that could withstand any scrutiny. And I had been building that evidence methodically, knowing this moment would come. My name is Eleanor Bradford. I'm 70 years old, a retired history professor who spent 42 years teaching students that the past always leaves traces. Documents, patterns, evidence that reveals the truth no matter how much people try to bury it. And nothing in my academic training prepared me to discover my own daughter was trying to erase me from the home I'd owned for 4 decades. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday afternoon around 3 o'clock, I found a folder hidden behind the couch cushions. Real estate comps for my neighborhood showing recent sales. Houses like mine selling for $890,000 to $950,000. A handwritten note in Kyle's blocky print. Immediate repairs, $35K max. Staging, $8K. Net after costs, $825K minimum. At the bottom, circled in Jessica's pen, senior apartments, $1,800 a month, all inclusive. She won't need more than that. My hand shook as I photographed every page under the dining room light. This wasn't casual browsing. They had contractors' estimates, a timeline, projected closing dates within 60 days. They'd been researching how to liquidate my life like it was a business transaction. And they'd calculated that keeping me alive and budget housing would cost them less than $22,000 annually, while they split nearly $1 million. But what I discovered 3 days later made that seem like simple greed. I started watching them more carefully. On Saturday morning, I heard Jessica's voice coming from my own bedroom, the master suite where I'd lived since my husband Thomas died 5 years ago. She was on speakerphone, her tone businesslike and cold. Mom's becoming increasingly difficult. Yesterday, she forgot to lock the back door. Last week, she missed taking her medication. I had to remind her. Every word was a lie. I locked doors obsessively. I organized my pills in a weekly container I've never once forgotten. Kyle's voice joined in. We're worried about her safety living alone, given her age and recent confusion. The person on the other end, a woman, responded, I'll need documentation, incidents, dates, witnesses if possible. Then we can discuss next steps for protective arrangements. That's when I understood. They weren't just planning to sell my house. They were constructing a false narrative of my incompetence to justify taking legal control. But the evidence I found 4 days later revealed they'd already put that plan into motion. 4 days later, while Jessica and Kyle were out, I found Kyle's laptop open on the kitchen table. In a folder labeled EB Estate, I discovered the smoking gun. a completed Adult Protective Services report claiming I had significant memory issues, poor hygiene, inability to manage finances, and confusion about basic tasks. The date was 3 weeks old, filed before I'd found any of their other plans. Attached were emails with an attorney specializing in conservatorships. The consultation had cost $400. Draft documents outlined a petition to declare me gravely disabled and transfer property management to Jessica as my court-appointed conservator. I sat at that table for 20 minutes, reading my daughter's signature on papers that painted me as a confused, failing woman who couldn't dress herself or remember her own address. The same signature I'd watched her practice in middle school, writing her name over and over until it looked sophisticated. That's when I knew. I had spent decades teaching students how to uncover historical lies. Now, I needed to create documentation strong enough to prove I was being systematically erased while fully competent. That evening, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. I wouldn't argue or plead my case. I would do what I'd always done: gather primary sources, cross-reference evidence, and build an archive so comprehensive that the truth would be undeniable. I contacted my neighbor, Patricia Chen, a retired social worker who had lived next door for 12 years. When I showed her the documents, her expression darkened. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "this is textbook elder abuse, financial exploitation combined with false APS reports. You need to protect yourself legally, and you need to do it immediately." That afternoon, I began constructing the case that would demolish my daughter's plan piece by piece. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a woman on a mission. I installed a small security camera in the living room, legal since it was my property. I made copies of every fraudulent document. I met with an attorney specializing in elder law and had my will updated with ironclad protections. I got a formal cognitive assessment from my doctor showing perfect mental competency. I documented every interaction, every lie they told about me, every conversation where they discussed my removal. I kept a daily journal proving my complete independence. Because I knew the confrontation was coming. And when Jessica stood in my living room and ordered me out, I would have everything ready. But to understand why this moment felt like watching my life's work crumble, you need to know one thing. I bought this house in 1987 with money I earned myself. Thomas and I had been married 3 years. I was pregnant with Jessica. Still teaching full-time while finishing my doctorate. We stood in this empty Victorian, sunlight streaming through original stained glass windows, and I told him this house would be my legacy, proof that a woman could own something substantial through her own work. Every mortgage payment came from my salary. When Thomas died of a heart attack 5 years ago, this house became both my sanctuary and my achievement. After his death, Jessica had drifted away, visiting maybe once every few months, always distracted, always in a hurry. Until 7 months ago, when she appeared with suitcases and that soft, desperate voice saying she and Kyle needed to stay just temporarily while they sorted out financial problems. She mentioned debts, Kyle's failed business, their apartment lease ending. I said yes because I remembered the little girl who used to sit in my home office playing with my typewriter while I graded papers. I thought I was helping my daughter through a rough patch. I didn't realize I was giving predators access to prey. Now, standing in this living room with my daughter pointing at the door like I was trash to be discarded during a storm, I understood with perfect clarity. This house was mine. Paid off 20 years ago. Titled in my name alone. Protected by legal documents they didn't even know existed. They were about to learn what happens when you try to rewrite history without checking the primary sources. The morning after I found Kyle's laptop evidence, Patricia came over with coffee and sat across from me at my kitchen table. She'd spent 30 years as a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases, and her assessment was clinical and terrifying. "Eleanor, I've seen this exact pattern dozens of times," she said, laying out the documents I'd copied. False APS reports, manufactured incompetency claims, family members positioning themselves for conservatorship. In California, once someone gets conservatorship, the victim loses all rights. They can't vote, can't manage money, can't even choose where they live. I've watched people lose million-dollar properties to family members who convinced a judge they were too confused to function. Her words hit like ice water. What do I do? You fight back with documentation, and you do it before they file that petition. That afternoon, Patricia drove me to meet Margaret Santos, an attorney who specialized in elder law and estate protection. Margaret listened to my situation for 10 minutes, reviewed my evidence, and immediately started making calls. Within 48 hours, I had a formal cognitive assessment from a geriatric specialist showing perfect mental function, completed with videotape testing, an updated property deed with enhanced legal protections, making it nearly impossible to transfer without multiple witness signatures, a new will with explicit disinheritance clauses for anyone who contested my competency, documentation submitted to Adult Protective Services refuting the false report with my doctor's statement, a prepared restraining order ready to file the moment Jessica or Kyle became threatening. Your daughter filed that APS report to create a paper trail, Margaret explained. It's step one in conservatorship cases, establish a pattern of concern before filing court papers. But now we've created a counter-narrative. You're not a confused elderly woman. You're a competent person being targeted for financial exploitation. 5 days before the storm, I discovered just how urgent their timeline had become. Kyle had left his phone on the bathroom counter. When it buzzed with a text notification, I saw the preview. Amanda, can't hold slot past no 15, need commitment on closing timeline. I picked up the phone. No password. He disabled it weeks ago, probably thinking I was too confused to check. What I found made my blood run cold. Text threads with a real estate agent named Amanda Chin showed they'd already scheduled a coming soon listing for my property. The proposed list date, December 1st, 3 weeks away. More messages revealed the depth of their planning. Kyle, working on it. Paperwork almost ready. Amanda, inspection already lined up. I have buyers circling for houses in her neighborhood. This'll move fast. Jessica, how fast can conservatorship go through? Mom's getting suspicious. Kyle, attorney says 30 to 45 days if we have solid documentation. Jessica, we have documentation. 3 weeks of APS reports plus the original filing. Kyle, then we're good. Once judge signs, property transfers to your management, clean sale after. They were talking about me like I was already gone, like my home was already theirs. The house I'd lived in for 38 years, protected for 5 years after Thomas died, was being marketed behind my back while I still lived in it. I screenshot everything and sent it to Margaret. Her response came within minutes. This is evidence of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Keep documenting. Don't let them know you know. Over the next week, I became meticulous. The same precision I'd used grading doctoral dissertations for 4 decades. I kept a daily journal documenting every task I completed independently. Meals prepared, bills paid online, medications taken precisely on schedule, errands run, books read, conversations with friends. Patricia helped me install a small camera in the living room, positioned to capture common areas without invading anyone's bedroom privacy. The footage told an undeniable story. I cooked, cleaned, managed my home competently. Meanwhile, Jessica and Kyle contributed nothing. No rent, no housework, no care. They left messes, used my car without asking, ate my food. The camera even caught Kyle going through my desk drawers when I was out, photographing financial documents. "They're building their case," Patricia said when I showed her. "But you're building a better one." 10 days into my documentation, I found myself alone in the house, sitting in Thomas's old reading chair, holding one of his books. My hands were shaking. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. I kept remembering Jessica at 7 years old, helping me plant roses in the front yard. Jessica at 16, crying in this living room after her first heartbreak. Jessica at 22, graduation day, thanking me in her speech for showing her what a strong woman looks like. When had she become someone who could look at her own mother and see only equity to liquidate? I thought about what Thomas would say. He'd always been protective, sometimes overprotective. But one phrase he'd repeated throughout our marriage echoed now. "Eleanor, never let anyone make you smaller than you are, not even family." I put down the book and called my attorney. It was time to stop gathering evidence and start using it. Margaret reviewed everything I'd compiled. The false APS reports, the text messages with the real estate agent, the security footage proving my competence, Kyle's emails about conservatorship, my doctor's cognitive assessment, my financial records showing perfect management. "This is bulletproof," she said. "But you need to act before they file court papers. Once a conservatorship petition is filed, you're fighting defensively. Right now, you can strike first." That afternoon, I filed my own petition, a request for a restraining order against Jessica and Kyle based on elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. I included every piece of evidence. Margaret submitted it to a judge she knew took elder abuse cases seriously. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. But Sunday night, the storm forecast came through. A major atmospheric river system, wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, flooding expected. School districts were pre-canceling Monday classes. And Sunday evening, as rain started hammering the roof, Jessica and Kyle confronted me in my living room. They didn't know Patricia was watching through her kitchen window, phone in hand. They didn't know I was recording every word. They were about to make the mistake that would destroy any sympathy they had left. It was 7:15 p.m. Wind rattled the windows so hard I thought the old Victorian glass might shatter. Rain drummed against the roof like a drumline, relentless and loud. I was in the living room, reading or pretending to read, when Jessica and Kyle came down the stairs together, moving with synchronized purpose that made my stomach tighten. The camera was recording. My phone was recording. Patricia was watching. This was it. "Mom, we need to talk." Jessica's voice was tight, controlled. She sat across from me on the couch Thomas had picked out in 1995. Kyle stood behind her like a sentinel. "About what?" I kept my voice steady. Kyle spoke first, which surprised me. "Eleanor, we've been patient, but you're becoming a liability. You're forgetful, you don't maintain this house properly, and frankly, it's not safe for you to live alone anymore." Every word was a scripted lie. "I'm not forgetful," I said calmly. "I manage this house and my life perfectly well." Jessica leaned forward, her expression rehearsed sympathy. "Mom, last week you left the stove on.
2 weeks ago you missed Dr.
Harrison's appointment. You're struggling, and it's okay to admit that. I felt rage building, but kept it contained. I turned the stove off immediately after making tea. And I didn't have an appointment with Dr. Harrison. You invented that. Jessica's face hardened. You're confused again. This is exactly what we're talking about. I reached beside my chair and pulled out the folder I'd been preparing for 2 weeks. I'm not confused, Jessica. Let me show you what I know. I laid out the first document, the real estate comps with Kyle's handwriting. You've been planning to sell my house. I laid out the second, the fake APS report. You filed false claims saying I'm incompetent. Third, screenshots of the text messages. You've already scheduled a listing date, December 1st. The room went completely silent, except for the storm howling outside. Jessica's face went white. You went through my... I cut her off. I found documents about my property in my house. Documents planning to have me declared incompetent so you could steal everything I own. Kyle's face twisted. Steal? This house is too much for you. You're wasting equity sitting here alone. It's my equity, I said quietly. I bought this house with my salary. I've maintained it for 38 years. It's mine. Jessica stood abruptly, her mask dropping completely. You're being selfish. We're drowning in debt, and you're sitting on $1 million you don't even need. So your solution is to lie about my mental capacity and have me institutionalized? We wouldn't have to if you just cooperate. Then Kyle snapped, and he said the words that would destroy them. Pack your things and get out now, Kyle shouted, pointing at the front door. You're a selfish, useless old woman, and we're done pretending to care. Get out before we call someone to remove you. The storm outside seemed to pause. Rain hammered harder against the windows. I stayed completely still. Then I held up my phone. Everything you just said has been recorded. And one more thing. I looked directly at Jessica. I called the police 15 minutes ago.
And my neighbor Patricia has been watching this entire time. The doorbell rang. Jessica's face went from angry red to ash gray in seconds. Kyle actually stumbled backward. I walked to the door and opened it to find 2 police officers standing in the rain, Patricia behind them in a raincoat, and my attorney Margaret with a briefcase under her arm. Officers, I said calmly, I need to report attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation. I handed them the folder, the property documents, the fraudulent APS reports, the text messages, the recording I just made, the security camera footage, my cognitive assessment. Margaret stepped forward, professional and firm. My client has been targeted for systematic financial exploitation by her own daughter. These individuals have filed false reports, planned unauthorized property sales, and just moments ago attempted to forcibly evict her from her own home. The lead officer looked at Jessica and Kyle. His expression was stone. Elder abuse is a felony in California. You need to gather your belongings and leave this property immediately. We'll be filing a full report. They packed in silence. 2 officers watched as Jessica and Kyle moved through the house, throwing clothes into suitcases. Jessica wouldn't look at me. At the door, she turned once, her eyes red, her face crumpled. For just a second, I saw my daughter, not the woman who tried to steal from me, the girl who used to fall asleep reading in my lap. Then she was gone. After everyone left, Patricia stayed. We sat in the kitchen where Jessica used to do homework, where Thomas used to read the morning paper. It doesn't feel like winning, I whispered. Patricia squeezed my hand. It never does. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived. Jessica's handwriting, less steady than usual. She wrote about the debt, about Kyle's pressure, about feeling like a failure. I convinced myself this wasn't really stealing, just taking what would eventually be mine anyway. I saw you as an obstacle instead of my mother. I don't know how to fix what I broke. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just wanted me to know
I understood what she'd done. I read that letter 4 times. Then I wrote back, I forgive you. But this house remains mine. When you're ready to rebuild honesty, we can talk. 8 months later. Spring sun warmed the porch I'd painted myself that March. A postcard sat on my reading table. Jessica, in Colorado, working as a museum coordinator. Divorced from Kyle. She sent updates monthly, short notes about her new life built without shortcuts. I hadn't responded to most. Some foundations take years to rebuild. Patricia still comes for coffee twice a week. My house is mine, legally, fully, undeniably. I teach occasional guest lectures at the university, mentor graduate students, tend my garden. I whisper to Thomas's photos sometimes. I protected what we built. And in the quiet of my home, that's enough.